I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here today with Dr. Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you about the mystical in everyday life. And indeed, in all of our lives, there is a mystical reality and truth, but so often we miss it, or we're unconscious or unaware of it. But it's always there, isn't it, Iris?
It's ever present. And when we live from the higher self, the higher aspect of being, then we're truly more in touch with the mystical. And since it's always there, as we're living from that higher aspect of being, then we're more aware of it. And it makes life more joyous, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so often when we use terms like the mystical or the higher self, people will maybe who are not familiar with our movement or our thought or philosophy think that it's a complex kind of idea or something that's abstract. But really the things that we talk about on this program on Confident Living, and certainly the mystical in life and the reality of our higher self or our higher being, is so much a natural part of our being. It just happens, and it's just there, isn't it?
Yes, and we often speak of the conscious, the subconscious, and the supra-consciousness. And so when we're functioning from higher than the conscious mind, then we're more in tune with the infinite. And there was a writer who wrote a book, In Tune with the Infinite, and I always thought that was very apropos for us, because if we are in tune with the infinite, then we're living from our higher self, and we're also receiving information, excuse me, from those on the inner planes of being who work with us and help us.
Mm-hmm. There's this constant reality of our being that is one with all of those around us, this unity of being with those here and those on the other side. We have talked in the past about angelic beings and about the spiritual dimension, and today probably we'll have some time to talk about that. But that connection really does make life joyous, and it also assures us that we're being guided. Things aren't really just happening out of nothingness, are they?
That's correct. And it's always been this way, but we're becoming more aware. We're functioning with a higher state of consciousness now. I was talking with a gentleman today named Jay, and he was saying that he has meditated. Well, I already knew that he had meditated most of his life. He's from India, and he's meditated most of his life. And he was saying that about the last 20 years, he's been more in touch with himself. And it's as if he's two people. He's reviewing what he's seeing and sensing from the inner, or when he's speaking and speaking publicly, then he's aware. He's almost as if he's two persons. And I could relate to that, and I bet you could too, because he was really using his conscious mind to observe what was coming through his subconscious or superconsciousness. And then he was speaking from that level, but observing from his conscious mind. And I remarked to him that for years I thought I was supposed to write a book called Look Within. Well, then I realized that I was just supposed to look within. We're all supposed to look within. And that's when we do, everything is within us. We have access to all knowledge in the universe. If we're quiet and still enough and allow our higher self to function and quiet the conscious mind and the chattering mind, then we have access to that. And I think that happens with people who write more than they realize, and more than most of us realize, because we're channeling that information. And I know there's been times, and I bet there has been for you, there's been times for me when I've been writing something and words come through that are not words that I normally would use. Now, usually I think that when they give us information from the inner, they use our vernacular and our vocabulary. But there's been times when it's not been like that. So I would just encourage our listeners to to look within themselves, and also to be aware of how they get information and how they access it. But we have to be clear in our thinking, and that means to be one-pointed, so that we're not thinking about what we're going to do 2 hours from now or later this evening or whatever. We're one pointed in the moment. And I know you often talk about keeping your consciousness at present time or living in the now in your lectures. And so that's the same idea, isn't it?
Very important. I think the concepts of being present in the moment, in the now, if you, is a term that we use so often, or that I use, and that's not unique to me, but it's been used in our philosophy for a long time. But being present in the moment, being aware, and you touched upon something I think that before we get away from it is so important, and especially in our busy lives today. And that has to do with the fact that our minds need to become quiet. And that doesn't always mean that we can go off and be in a quiet and place of solace, although there are certainly times that we can do that in meditation or prayer or our house of worship or our times of reflection. But really, because so much, we're all called upon to do so much in today's world, and we're so bombarded with information, our minds really become cluttered, and that clutter keeps us from connecting with that magnificent creative power. When you were speaking about writing, I think people who are creative, whether it's writing or speaking or acting, the creative reality or the creative dimension of our being comes forth so much more fully as we are able to put aside the confusion and the clutter of our own thinking and open our minds, and you put it so well, in being very centered and being very, very pointed in our in the dynamic of our mind. And we haven't talked for a long time on this program, but we used to talk a lot about it, how we all have a way in which our minds operate. And we need to, as we look at our lives and as we go through this process of introspection and reflection and self-evaluation, we need to look at how it is our minds function and whether our minds are seeing the negative or the positive more. Many people see the negative more often. Many people are confused. Many people are depressed. Many people, and yet other people are going through seemingly the same situations or similar experiences, and yet they don't have the same outcome. And so it is possible to change our way of thinking, and when we change our way of thinking, we change the world. And that another set of words that we haven't used for a long time is we live in our minds and not the world. Then that simply means that we do live in the process of our thoughts and our thinking. But then what we're talking about today in terms of the mystical, and the word that we used a few minutes ago, which was consciousness, is really even a dimension deeper than our thinking mind. And so often we think we have to have a brain to think, and of course our brains are eminently important in our physical function, but our minds emanate vibration, and our minds emanate creative thought, and thought is in fact creative, and we're building the reality that we've come to know.
Yes, and as you so often say, we have to keep our consciousness in the present time, keep our consciousness living in the now, because it's easy to do if we know what if we put our mind to do it. It seems impossible to do, but if we just center ourselves, and we can center ourselves with a word or a phrase, and it's our intention, it's our intent. And so many people talk about the intent now, so many spiritual leaders talk about our intent is the important thing, and it really is, isn't it? If our intention is to be quiet and stilled and access information from the inner planes, from higher consciousness, that's what we do. But if our intent is to do 1,600 things at one time, then we don't get anything done, but we stay busy, busy, busy. And we create that energy around us of discordance. And we might not feel that it's discordant, but it is. And so we'll knock something off and break it, or we will spill something. Or there's any number of things that manifest in our environment because we are not, because we're agitated. And our energies are agitated. We might not feel agitated, but our energies are agitated because everything is vibration, and the vibrations that we set out make a difference. And there are people who are calm and serene, and then there are people who are calm and serene part of the time. But when you look at someone like that, you can know that they are, it's a deliberate plan that they followed so that now at last they can be calm and serene. So it's as if we make a plan, follow that plan, and then it manifests the way we plan it. And sometimes we just put our minds on to doing all the many things that have to be done, and just like getting our physical self ready to suitable for the day, and we don't take time to meditate to get our minds quieted. So we can each make up our own plan and follow that, and it makes life far more worthwhile, and it brings the mystical and the magical into our lives, and it makes life more, shall we say, bearable. There's a lady I know who says she used to walk every morning because it allowed her to face whatever the telephone brought, and I thought that was very apropos, because we can hardly face what the telephone brings every day. But if we calm ourselves and are serene, and you touched on this earlier, that we have to do it deliberately, but we have to then forget that we're doing it.
Yeah, and like anything else, as we do it more, it becomes a part of our unconscious activity. And so the conscious act becomes an unconscious act. And just like negativity, negative thinking begins as a conscious act. We may not be fully conscious of it, but people who are negative are indeed fully conscious of their negativity. And then they begin to get better and better at it. And so what we want is not to be better and better at those things that keep us from our growth and empowerment and strength and vitality and health and prosperity and abundance, but we want to get better and better and stronger at the normal process of just allowing the mystical to come through, the creative to come through, and to allow this force to become a part of our daily life. So often in counseling, and we both do a lot of counseling, and whether it's individual counseling or couples counseling, or when we're talking to young people, people will often say, well, as we bring people together, you don't hear me, or you don't understand me. And so, and a lot of that, or at the core of that, is this lack of our connection one with another. And that really has to do, in many cases, with our detachment. We're so busy not being in the now with that person that we don't connect with them, we don't understand them, and we don't listen. And because we don't listen, they are wonderfully perceptive. We're all wonderfully perceptive. And so we want people to hear what we have to say, and we want people to react to what we have to say and to respond appropriately to it.
Yes, and it's really a pleasure listening to other people, to what the other person has to say, and it stimulates our minds too to think. And it doesn't mean that we're supposed to be thinking about what am I going to say next. It just comes if we're truly listening to what the other person says.
Yeah, a number of years ago, as you've heard me speak for many years, I learned that in speaking, it was much easier to just do less preparation and open myself instead to the circumstances of the situation, and to allow that to come forth in a natural way rather than in a structured way.
And it makes life far more enjoyable. And also, the biggest bonus is we don't get tired. At the end of the day, we're not we're not tired, because it's in forcing ourselves into anything that creates the tiredness, that creates the fatigue, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's one thing that our viewers can take away, is that if they're feeling fatigued, if they're feeling drained of vitality and energy, then it is that there is this negative conflict going on within them, because the positive aspects of life, the connection with the mystical and with the creative reality of infinite intelligence, of limitless potential, it actually strengthens us and makes us more vibrant in terms of what we do.
Yes, it makes us more fluid too, because we flow and our energies flow. And you know, if anyone who sees clairvoyantly can see the energy around a person, and the energy, we have the 7 force fields, the 7 chakras, and most people are familiar now with the chakra system, that we have 7 major chakras starting at the crown of our head and ending at the root base of the spine. But clairvoyantly, you can see that energy going, and it's like a circle, and it's like open Henry's cup of gold, or that kind of honeysuckle, where it comes out on a stem and then comes out in a bulb. That energy then comes out, and it goes like that in a clockwise direction. And you can see that, and so it's too bad we can't all see it, and because then we would slow down, and then we would be more quieted. And I don't mean still, but quieted within, because you can see how that, and then especially at the solar plexus chakra, which is located near the navel, then that gets really crazy when people are overly emotional. So just knowing that, I think, makes a difference. And we can put our hand over our solar plexus chakra, and the one I'm speaking of, the emotional center, and just say, peace, be still. It makes a difference. Again, it's the intent.
Goes right to the intent, and it has wonderful results. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you some information.
Invite you to be with them every Sunday morning at the magnificent and historic Scottish Rite Cathedral, located at 855 Elm Avenue in Long Beach. Our worship service and Sunday school begin at 11 a.m. Angelus Unity Cathedral Church at the Scottish Rite Cathedral meets in the only true cathedral church located in the city of Long Beach. This magnificent grand building is a true architectural jewel. The service begins at 11 a.m. and there is Sunday school for the children. There is always plenty of free parking in the cathedral lot. Mike and Iris look forward to meeting you and your family this Sunday. People of all faiths are always welcome. We will be saving you a seat this Sunday at Angelus Unity Cathedral Church at the Scottish Rite Cathedral. You will be warmly welcomed.
Before the break, you were talking so well about this emotional point. And as you were, I was thinking about how many people tell us, again, in counseling and discussions, when their life is in turmoil, how they feel it at the pit of their stomach.
Yeah.
And that really is confirmation of exactly what you're talking about. Also, we feel that stress so often at the center of our emotional being, and then that sends vibrations through the entire physical body that really wreak havoc from a physical standpoint. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the musculature part there is tense and contracts, and it's either contracts or just is tense and stays tense. It's like a Charlie horse in your leg. And so we can be, again, if our intent is to be calm and peaceful, then it will be. And I would like to make a suggestion that everyone just treat life as an adventure. Just make it an adventure. And when we do, then we don't try to control other people. And then we try to see what happens, what's going to happen next. Instead of, we want to see what happens next. We want to see how this unfolds. Instead of trying to structure it ourselves and force others into doing certain things. Just see how it works. And it makes a big difference in the way other people react around us too.
Absolutely. We all have this idea that we have to plan every moment, that we have to be busy every moment, that we have to do everything. And in fact, life is meant to be an enjoyable and wonderful experience. And we can see it in the face, in the countenance, in the appearance, in the physical demeanor of people who are happy and well adjusted. And we know that those people in mind, body, and spirit are well balanced, whole, and holy people, and are in connection with that mystical aspect of life. And when we talk about the mystical aspect of life, so often I think words build fences that keep us from coming together. And so people say mystical, oh, well, you're talking about burning incense and dancing around and all of that. And what we're really talking about is the very practical aspect of getting in touch with the fact that there is more to life, that there's more to the experience, and that there's more to our being than simply what we see. And because of that, life is a journey, and it's a joy, and it's an exciting adventure. And with that, if we can instill that in ourselves and our children and our coworkers and our family, we're able to go through this experience and to grow through it in such a magnificent way. And again, we become so strong in our health and in our vitality, and we don't become so weary and so burdened and so sad. And that's not to say that we're not going to be sad from time to time, but or burdened from time to time, because we all have problems, every one of us. But we are going to enjoy our lives, and life is meant, our lives, not only ours, Mike's and Iris's, and everyone's life is meant to be enjoyed in a positive and an abundant way.
It's meant to be, and we can make it so. And we don't have to work at it, really. We have to not work at it. It's a state of mind, isn't it?
It is. It is so easy if we just let it happen. But so often we don't let it happen, or we let the things happen in our lives that keep us from this natural flow of energy and vitality and strength and prosperity and all of the rest of it. When we talk about abundance and prosperity, we're not talking about money necessarily, although that's certainly a part of it. We're talking about the prosperity of mind and thinking, the abundance of ideas, the abundance of well-rounded emotions and healthy relationships. And all of that vitality and abundance is there for us if we would just sit down at the banquet table of life and begin to take it in. And that's the simple mystical reality of life.
Yes, and then the mystical comes to us more often. Like synchronicity is happening more and more, it's more and more prevalent. So synchronicity will happen in our lives, and we'll see it with great joy. And we will have any number of things happen that sometimes we think, oh, that's just a coincidence, or oh, that's not. That we don't look on it as being magically mystical. But there's books we can read that also help us to show. There's a book, Mystical Journeys, and it tells about what people. It's a lot of different articles that people have written about wonderful happenings in their lives that was out of the ordinary. But anyone who would read that book would see, well, they've had those things happen, because I've read that book and I see so many of those articles. And one thing that happened to me is in that book too. But as you read something like that, you can realize more fully that, yes, my life is rich in that way, but we just take it for granted. So we don't want to take those things for granted, but accept them, and just express gratitude to eternal God that these things are happening in our lives. Mm-hmm. And there's another aspect that we have our consciousness in this lifetime, but a part of our superconsciousness is every life we've lived in prior lives, all the things that have happened to us in prior lives. So we can access that if we go deep enough or quiet and still enough. And And we can just say, may I be still enough to know thee, O God, or something like that. It would depend on what we feel like saying. It's not the words that do it, it's the energy we put behind the words, isn't it? Every time it's the energy we put behind the words.
Mm-hmm. And then the joy and happiness that we were talking about really is our confirmation. But that presence of joy and happiness is confirmation of that connection. And so if we have people with joy and joy and happiness in their lives, if we have joy and happiness in our lives, that is confirmation of the truths that we're speaking of right now.
Yes, and that we are tuned to the divine, and that those who are listening to us, when they have that experience, that they are tuned to the divine, and they can just be grateful that they have grown to that point where they can be attuned and still be in this life and living a very viable physical life, but be attuned to the infinite.
And this issue of life being a journey and an adventure is really an idea, I think, and a concept that puts us in touch with the mystical and makes life so hopeful and so much fun.
Yes.
And life is supposed to be fun. And yet we see so often people who don't see life as fun. And that doesn't, again, mean that there aren't going to be difficulties. And you and I both know people who've had very difficult circumstances and situations, lost jobs, relationships that have ended, illnesses, all kinds and manner of limitation. And yet in the midst of all of that, they are able to claim this connection and this vitality that we're talking about. And it does not at all mean denying how we're feeling. And we always spend some time talking about the fact that we need to feel the way that we feel. But then if we're feeling in a negative way, if we're feeling depressed, if we're feeling lonely, if we're feeling separated, if we're feeling unhappy, then we have a choice in terms of whether we want to stay there. And if we don't want to stay there, we can connect more fully and completely with the mystical and the divine and be the whole person that we were created to be from the beginning.
Yes, and when we live a life of faith in a larger, something larger than we, and that we are part of that, and it's according to what religious persuasion we have, but we say Creator God, we are part of Creator God, and every person on earth, every person is, and not only on earth, but in heaven, every person everywhere that's ever been created and wherever they are still a part of Creator God. And if we feel that, truly feel it and know it, then we know then that every person living is a part of Creator God, and we are a part of each other. And people, different religions speak that in different languages, but it's so simple, isn't it? And when we do feel attuned in that way to all people everywhere, then it makes a difference in our lives. It makes a difference in the way we live our lives. And I think those great ones who have written wonderful books and wonderful music have felt their connection with Creator God more fully.
Mm-hmm. And what a wonderful way to bring our program to an end in this concept of the unity consciousness that we have with all people and with all beings. And whatever your faith, whatever your background, whatever your circumstance or situation, you can connect with the mystical, you can connect with that which is divine, and you can be empowered and strengthened in magnificent and wonderful ways. We hope that you've enjoyed the information we've shared with you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.